We're live. Hello, everybody. We are 901 Physical Therapy. I'm Dr. Clay Jones.
And Dr. Sarah Michael.
Our phones are turned to the side because we can just get closer and y'all can hear us better. So if you're watching us on your phones and everywhere else, of course, we are tilted. We understand that. When we try to go portrait mode, it's too far away. We didn't like it. So in fact, we can scoot even closer. So you're just going to have to watch this with your phone tilted. Please accommodate to us. We're not going to accommodate to you. I'm sorry. Alrighty, so it's just Dr. Sarah and I. There might be a guest appearance from Dr. Jessica, not Jonathan. Jonathan's over there. We are here for the 411 and the 901. That's what we've called this recently, where we pick a topic and we do our best to educate you guys. Today it's going to be about Achilles tendon pain. We, in the past several weeks, have kind of picked broader topics like low back pain, neck pain, that was our first one, shoulders, knees, which is great, but we tend to get very broad. And today we decided that we're going to take, again, a different approach, where we're going to pick one issue and really do a deep dive in that. And again, that's why we're talking about Achilles tendon pain. Sarah is our Achilles tendon expert. The expert in the Mid-South, in the Southeast, in the United States, in the Western Hemisphere.
We're just getting, keep going.
In the galaxy.
Far, far away.
Far, far away. She's an expert in a galaxy far, far away. Not this one, but another galaxy. Just kidding. Sarah and myself, we treat runners a lot here at 901 PT, and it's something that we see a lot. Sarah and herself has been doing a lot of specific research, and she educates the team on really trying to stay up to date with what is the best thing to do for Achilles pain. Because guys, it's a hard thing to treat. I mean, this is not a straightforward issue. It can be a very frustrating thing, which is why we wanted to tackle it. So today we're going to talk about why we see it, why it occurs, kind of one of those risk factors that you might have yourself. That's causing it to occur in your Achilles. We're going to talk about what's actually going on inside the tendon, kind of the science, the tissue studies, the real some of the biomechanics again around the ankle, and then we're going to talk about what to do about it, how to treat it. And to do that, you have to really understand the different phases of Achilles tendon pain, and we're going to talk about what is best treatment, both in what we see as practitioners, as therapists, as well as what the most current research studies show. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Sarah, Clay, why do you think why do we see Achilles tendon pain occurring a lot in society?
I think that there's numerous reasons. Again, kind of like you were saying, I mean, I started seeing this a lot. I mean, I treat a lot of runners, and a lot of endurance athletes, running in particular, that were dealing with Achilles tendon pain, and we're dealing with it for really long periods of time, really long chronic issues. And I think about a year ago, that's when I started to take just like a deep dive into what in the world is going on. So I've spent the better part of the last year just doing a lot of research and kind of honing in for tendon dysfunction in particular. And spend a lot of time and energy on the Achilles tendon itself, just because other tendons do kind of behave differently. But I think that on some level, it's our change in our lifestyle. We sit a good bit during the day,
particularly now more than ever.
Right.
I mean, I wonder how many people who are listening to this have started having more Achilles tendon issues since the COVID-19 issue, who have had changes in their lifestyle.
Right, and then a lot of times, like even if you are doing higher level activity. You're still sitting for the majority of the day, and then you're going straight into really high impact, really high power type workouts that can kind of flare some dysfunction, so I think that there are a lot of reasons like that kind of lead to it becoming popular. I mean, it actually has a really high incidence rate even in a non-athletic population, right? So just even our kind of everyday Joes, I mean, it's just a really common area to have pain.
Yes. And I think that's important because we see people with Achilles tendon pain. I've been practicing physical therapy for 12 years, and I've been dealing with people who have Achilles tendon pain who are not distance runners. And that's sometimes we get that from questions from people. Well, I'm not a runner. I'm not getting Achilles tendon pain. And we get that same question for people who come in with elbow tendon issues, that, you know, golfer's elbow or tennis elbow, and they're like, I don't play golf, but I got this tendon problem. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's some interesting things we might be able to shed light on why tendon pain can occur. And it's not just from doing too much, but it can also even be doing from too little. Mm-hmm. So what's the issue with that? Like, why is doing too little, Sarah, cause pain in a tendon?
So if we think about just even what our tendons are, right? Like, what is a tendon? What is the function of a tendon? A tendon is the area that ties the muscle to the bone, to whatever bone is being attached, right? So it is the ropey little area that attaches to the muscle, to the big belly, and pulls that in. So when that muscle contracts, whatever muscle it might be, it's going to pull on the tendon and create an action at the joint, right? So that's ultimately the purpose of a tendon.
I mean, who here has not, when they've eaten chicken, dissected their chicken there in front of them?
You do love your chicken.
And pulled on the tendon, you know, particularly if you haven't like broken the bone yet and you see things move. Like
exactly.
Pulls on a lever. Who hasn't done that?
Even
Come on, can I get a witness? Someone help me out here.
I bought a beef tenderloin, and I was butchering the beef tenderloin, and you can see, you can see the fascia then start to blend into the tendon, and that's what ours does too. It doesn't happen rapidly. It's kind of a blend of those two. So in that, there's multiple areas that you can get injured, right? The tendon can get injured where it meets the muscle. It can get injured right in the middle of the tendon, or it can get injured where the tendon then ties to the bone, right? So we've got multiple spots that can get irritated.
So like in the calf muscle, right? In the calf, you have the gastrocnemius. Those are the two big muscles. It's the one big muscle. It's got two heads, a medial head and a lateral head, or inside and outside head.
When people think about big, strong calves, that's typically the group that you're going to think of.
Do I need to show my calves here? I got some. No, I don't.
I don't know. I got some pretty good calves.
Sarah's got some good calves. Yeah. I'm not going to say. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to say. Yeah, but so that's the gastroc muscle. And then underneath that is a huge muscle called the soleus. Those two muscles together, their forces combined, form the calf muscles. And there's other ones deeper than that that go all the way into the flexors of our toe flexors and other muscles like that. Muscles that also deep in there that help move the rest of our foot. But what we're talking here with the Achilles tendon, it's where you're mainly going to have that gastrocnemius and the soleus muscle attaches into it. And like you said, you can get a tendon problem where the muscle is, or middle of the tendon, which is most common, and then where the tendon attaches into the insertion, and then where it inserts into the calcaneus, which is the heel bone. So that can come from. So let's talk about the risk factors here, right? So we've already started to talk about, like, if you're having Achilles pain, people want to know. We all know. Well, why did it happen? What are some of the things that might have led to that? So we've already talked about, say, underloading. So a tendon thrives, right? A tendon thrives off of loading. And that's a word that we throw around a lot, I think, in the PT world. So loading means that you're putting stress to it. You're tugging on it. Yeah, good stress, right? Not just bad stress, but you're tugging on it. You are
Which, if we think about what
pressure.
The tendon is made to do, it's meant to be tugged on. It's meant to be pulled on. So really that's
we're sideways. We are sideways, guys. I know we're sideways. We're sideways because we can get closer, and hopefully y'all can hear us better. If we go vertical, you can't see us as well. You don't hear us as well. So you know what? Turn your phone.
If you're watching, you can turn your screen lock on your phone. And
we're gonna be smaller. Don't worry about it. You don't have to look at us. Just listen to us.
So a tendon is really designed for pull. That's what it loves to do. It's what it wants to do. It wants to be pulled. And so, when you think about...
It wants to be loaded, pulled.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. So tissues in the body, each tissue kind of has its own specific purpose. It has its own thing that it wants to do. A lot of times, our body doesn't like it when then you shift and do something else to that tendon, right? So like if we think about the way that bone is loaded, right? I can land and I can jump and my femur can tolerate that. But if you take a baseball bat and you come at me from across my femur,
yikes,
it can't tolerate that, and that's where you could end up with a fracture really pretty easily. Not because my femur is not strong, but because you came at it at a different way in an area where that is not strong. It's not built for that. So that's a lot of times where we end up with other issues with tendons if they're being compressed, or there's another torsional force. There's some sort of other force acting on it than what it wants to do.
Right. So putting the tendon under a type of stress that it's not used to can start to cause that tendon some pain. So one of the main risk factors for tendon issues, not just underloading, meaning you sit on your butt all day, you don't do anything, the principle, use it or lose it. If you're not putting load and stress to your tendons, then your tendons can start to go into a disrepair. I mean, they're not going to continue to rebuild itself, right? This is also kind of the same concept of osteoporosis. Bones thrive off of appropriate loading, right? If you overload it, you take a bat to it, you fracture it, it breaks. Or if you do more than it can take, and you can get a stress fracture. You underload it, you don't do enough movement, and of course lots of other factors go into that as well, your diet and hormones, that kind of thing, but you don't do enough, and the bone can start to get osteoporotic. You get osteopenia, where the bone is not strong. Same thing for tendons, right? Plenty of people who are not staying active, not moving, can start to have their tendons break down. That happens in the shoulder, elbow, it happens in the Achilles. All right. On the other side of the coin, let's talk about the risk factors for people developing Achilles tendon pain if they overload it. Like clasping, what is that going to look like?
So, a lot of times, it happens really commonly with any sort of like high impact or jumping type activity. So of course, running is one of the first things that comes to mind, but basketball players and things like that.
Like Conley had.
Yeah, where you've got a lot of spring that's coming from that Achilles, because that's really what the Achilles is. It's a big spring, and that's what it's meant to do. I suppose any other hurdles, jumping type sports.
Tennis, just quick reactions. I've treated a lot of tennis players who've had Achilles issues. They've been, you sit on your butt, or maybe you're not sitting on your butt, but maybe you're not doing things throughout the winter. You're not doing things throughout, the early seasons, and then spring hits, we start playing more tennis if you're not someone who's accustomed to playing indoor a lot. And that type of quick spring that Achilles needs to take on, and all of a sudden you get out there. Say what?
Even CrossFit.
Yeah, CrossFit. A bunch of box jumps.
Double unders.
Say that again?
Double unders.
Oh gosh, single unders for me. Landing from when you do a lot of pull-ups, you're always landing. So but just any type of thing, if you have not been doing something in a while, and that's one reason why we picked this topic for today, is because a lot of us have maybe not been accustomed, or not been doing what our typical schedule is for the past 4 to 6 weeks. And now some of the gyms are opening up. Or maybe you weren't running at all, but then COVID hit and you started, I'm going to start running, and you start to put this tendon under a lot of mechanical stress and load that is good for it inherently, but if you do it too much too soon, then that Achilles tendon is not able to repair itself fast enough. And so too much too soon can start to cause the Achilles to break down.
Just as well as too little too soon.
Yeah, too little too soon, too much too soon. There's that appropriate balance there that you have to strike. Okay, so underloading it, overloading it. Other risk factors that we see is strength. And there's nuances to this, but what helps, what kind of muscles do we need to have, or what are the key aspects of strength to help take care of the tendon?
First and foremost, if we think about where the Achilles tendon is attaching to, it's attaching to the gastrocnemius, the gastroc-soleus complex. You got to be strong there, right? So, because our muscles help to attenuate force, they help to generate force. And so if you have inadequate strength in the muscles around that area, right? A lot of times the soft tissue structures, the tendons, the ligaments, those will take more force, right? So certainly a big thing is looking at calf strength, and especially if you've already started to have some pain, because pain itself is a process that then inhibits and makes muscles weaker, right? Your body, as it goes into kind of protection mode of, oh, I'm going to try to kind of protect this area and try to decrease its activity level so I can just let it be quiet and heal. Well, then that makes your tendon weaker, but then your activity level is staying the same. Your muscle is weaker. You're continuing to load it and load it and load it.
Yeah, vicious
not
cycle.
be able, and then that's where we end up in kind of treating more chronic type issues.
Yeah, yeah. It's that vicious cycle. That's where if you start having that pain, you don't pay attention to it, or you don't do anything about it, you just keep doing it, and you don't actually change the factors of why I got there in the first place. Mm-hmm. Because maybe you keep the same running schedule, or you started running and your calf muscles were too weak to begin with, maybe, whatever it is, but you keep doing that, you don't have time to build that strength, that tendon can't keep up.
And then it causes effects in the chain, right? So then, looking at the next areas up, the knee, the hip, right? Then you get muscular changes in all of those areas. And or potentially a weakness in the leg could cause a tendon issue in the hip, right? Because when the lower leg gets tired and fatigued, the action at the hip increases, right? So then now you're actually, because the lower leg is tired, and it's like, all right, I'm going to peace out, right? Then ultimately something else has to take up that force and that stress, and the hip has to work harder. So a lot of times then you can even see, chain reaction.
A good example of that for me was yesterday. So I dealt with a running injury about a year ago from my knee, patellar tendon, and kind of joint line. And I had a stiff ankle for a long, long time, didn't know anything about. And what I found out yesterday was weaker calves than I expected. Particularly, it was the right side. I was taking one of my athletes, a young teenage soccer player, through some jumping, and I was demonstrating first how to do it correctly. And I was like, don't worry, I won't say her name, but I almost did. This is how you do it correctly. It's a triple jump where you jump, left, your left leg, you go three jumps in a row. Then I showed my right side, and I felt uncoordinated. It was terrible. I was like, don't worry, this is gonna be a struggle for you. I know this is gonna be tough. And then she just did it, she just bounced across the room. And I was like, dang. And in particular, my right side, that bounding, that jump, the ability to jump, I do jumps in my CrossFit, I go to Iron Tribe, and I do jumps in Iron Tribe a lot, and I'm fine with that, but I'm always going on two legs. Mm-hmm. And so I did this one-legged calf-based jump. It sucked.
Right.
And I was like, okay, and it was a highlight to me. I've done stuff to take care of my knee, and I'm running no problems without any pain, but I'm also not trying to go too fast. But I know, what that highlighted to me is if I'm going to try to start increasing my speed, I better take care of that strength issue on my right side. Because I've been doing some hill runs lately to help build up my calf muscles. But I got to focus on that right side. Because if I have a weak calf like that, that will totally affect how much stress goes to my knee.
Right.
So, yeah, that was an eye-opener for me. The first time, I'm 38 years old. It's one of the first times I felt older. Man, I better take care of this because I want to try to maintain my spring. But then I went to an Iron Tribe class yesterday, and we did a lot of box jumps, and I felt good. I was like, okay, I can still jump straight. I just couldn't jump the other way. Anyways, I digress. Okay, another risk factor that I think is worth mentioning is the ankle, chronic ankle sprains. I think that's something that we see in our Achilles patients sometimes, not all the times, but someone who has sprained their ankle repetitively or just did a good number on it, and if you don't have good ankle flexibility because of repetitive ankle sprains, particularly what's called ankle dorsiflexion, right, where your knee goes over your toe, to where you can't stretch, where the ankle doesn't move as well, then that can potentially, not always, it can potentially lead to increased stress to the Achilles because the ankle's not doing what it's supposed to do. And maybe the ankle doesn't have the flexibility, or maybe your other stabilizing muscles of your ankle are not doing well. So when your foot lands, we should have the ability to absorb that contact, absorb that force, and all of our muscles in our ankle, as well as the ligaments in our ankle, provide some support. If that's not happening because of repetitive ankle sprains, then that can throw stress to the Achilles, and it has to be addressed.
And we also talked about, kind of early on, right? There are specific movements and specific forces that a tendon likes, and then there are things that it doesn't like, right? So if you've got a really stiff ankle and then that limits your motion, the tendon itself can kind of get pushed into the bone there, and the tendon doesn't want to be pushed. It wants to be pulled, right? So then that has a tendency that can irritate things as well. And the other thing I see with ankle sprains a lot is a lot of times if you have a loose ankle, then particularly, like maybe you don't have the same ligamentous support that you had kind of pre-sprain, and then everything else is working a little bit harder to try to stabilize your ankle. So a lot of times that can be an issue, particularly if you didn't rehab that well and get good control back at the ankle or good control back at the hip. So
and I think with an ankle, loose ankle, or even one of the areas of the ankle that can get stiff with a sprain is the side-to-side motion, not just the forward and back, which we call dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, but inversion, eversion, which is side-to-side. That can get either too loose or too stiff, but that throws off the mechanics of the ankle to where the foot can't accommodate with the side-to-side motions, and so now the Achilles is having to absorb some of those torques, those lateral side-to-side torques, as opposed to what it's built for, which is more of a straight forward and backwards, a sagittal plane movement. And now the Achilles is picking up some of this lateral movements, and I think that can start to, again, it throws stress onto that Achilles that it's not built for, so it can start to talk to you. Things that we do for that is we have to work on ankle balance exercises with our patients. We have to work on, sometimes this is where taping can be very helpful, where you can tape the ankle to provide a little bit of support so that the tape is supportive, so the Achilles can calm down a little bit. I've totally done that many times with my patients who are coming in. I know that tape is something that helps for a lot of people and not for other people, but it's the kind of thing that if you can tape the ankle, provide a little bit of support, but you can still keep the person moving and running, that little support from the tape can help calm it down enough to allow the body to heal that Achilles to get a good result out of it. So it's something I do.
I do use tape for like short-term pain relief and that sort of thing. That's what I think it's kind of best for. I think people kind of
short-term.
They can go big and bold with some claims that some tape can do, but I think realistically, like I've seen good clinical results in using tape in an acute situation like that.
Short-term.
But then knowing that, like, hey, you don't have to be that person that shows up on race day that is literally like covered head to toe.
No, I like that. It's cool. It's colorful. It provides color.
It seems like it would be hot.
No. All right, so y'all, the reason why we're talking about this, right, is let's always bring it back to risk factors, is because we see people with Achilles issues a lot, and we want people to understand that this can be a very, very frustrating injury, and we're going to get to it here in a little bit, but a lot of times people are told who have Achilles pain, just rest it, or let's just put it in a boot, or let's just use some anti-inflammatories, some NSAIDs, or a steroid injection, and that can't be, those things can be helpful, and we're going to talk about here in a little bit, but too many times that's all that people are told what to do, and we don't consider the other factors, the fact that maybe you underloaded it, maybe the fact that you've underloaded your legs because maybe you sit too much and you don't have good calf strength. So if you've never worked on calf strength before, then you can expect that this Achilles may still be a problem. If you've not dealt with a chronic ankle sprain, if you have not dealt with the fact that your program, you're always pushing, and you're never giving your body appropriate rest during your week plan or the programming of your running week, then your Achilles is going to continue to be a bothersome. And too many people say, it is what it is. I'm just going to have to deal with it. That's a bad idea, because if the Achilles gets into a degenerative state enough, that's going to really weaken that tendon. And now we're talking about you're at a major risk factor for that tendon tearing. Kevin Durant, can I get a hands up? Right? I mean, like if you don't do the appropriate thing and you keep stressing it, you can expect that you're going to increase your risk of that Achilles tearing, and you don't want that.
I think that's to me is a lot of times one of the more concerning things too, is that a lot of times Achilles tendon pain for a lot of people is not crippling per se, right? Like they're still able to, it hurts, right? But a lot of people, I mean, we're used to feeling daily aches and pains, and they push through and they just keep going.
Particularly what about the Achilles makes people think, it's not that bad, because maybe it hurts at first, but
it hurts at first. A lot of times with tendon pain, like it'll get a little bit better the more you do. It'll eventually will start hurting a little bit more after. Sometimes now it's becoming more constant through your workout. Now it's hurting more after it's getting sharper. But the problem here is that, yeah, you can take the tendon to a point where it be on no return, quite honestly. So I do see that a lot where people, if they had dealt with it early,
Yes.
they really could have made this process so much quicker and so much easier in getting back. But because they just kept on, it wasn't too bad, you know, it was really, I don't know, it's not horrible. And so they just kept going. And now we have a point where, you know, it's hard to say. I mean, the tendon itself may not fully heal and repair.
Right. I want to grab these phones and shake them. Like, if you're listening to this and you have recent onset of acute Achilles tendon pain, do something about it.
Yeah.
Don't let it get chronic, people.
Yeah.
Don't let that happen. So important. And that's true for anything. If you start having something, deal with it immediately as soon as possible. Don't just...
Easier.
It's so much easier to treat.
It's so, if it's
so
acute,
much easier.
it's more a management of calming it down, letting it heal, and then you gradually get back into it. But then, the longer it goes on,
I got to read a comment here.
And the longer this goes on, it gets into, like, your body literally changes. The tendon physically changes. If you looked at it under a microscope, it would look like a very different tendon. And so you're fighting like biological changes that are happening.
Yep. Don't fight those biological changes. Work with them, not against them. We got a question from the amazing Caitlin. She asked, we'll get in this maybe later, but I have to turn my head because, yes, that's what's going on. Would double unders help strengthen my Achilles tendon? Should I be doing them more or less with added running? So this athlete is running more, and she loves it. Caitlin, you love it. Keep telling yourself you love it. But she's also working in riding, cycling, as well as swimming. And she's a CrossFitter. She's awesome. So do double unders strengthen your calf muscles, the Achilles tendon? Yes. So my answer to that is it depends. We don't want to underload it. You don't want to overload it. So you're definitely not, Caitlin, you're not in the ballpark of underloading anything here. We're in the ballpark of, as you are increasing your running, as you are also maintaining your fitness through CrossFit, do you need to add more to that? My answer to that would be, honestly, if you're going to CrossFit classes consistently and you're, on a weekly basis, double unders, single unders are going to be programmed into that pretty much, that I don't think you need to go home and add extra double unders to it. I think you're doing a great job of doing enough explosion and work through your calf, through your jumping, through your single leg work with CrossFit. The single unders, the double unders that you're already doing, I think that in itself is doing a great job of building strength and bounce and good, we call it stiffness in the tendons, which we're going to talk about. I think you're doing a great job of that. I don't think you need to go home every day and do 200 double unders.
I think, right. I mean, I think that ultimately it's all, like, tendon health is all about balance, right? Balance in how much stress you're putting to the tendon and how much recovery time you're putting to the tendon. So you really have to think, like, I wouldn't, particularly if you're increasing your running, so you're increasing how much plyometric your activity you're doing already, I would not go and increase how many double unders you're doing, because now you're increasing two plyometric variables at the same time, and that's where I think that you might run into a little bit more increased risk of injury. But I don't think that you need to say, I need to stop doing double unders if you were already doing them either. Right? Because I do think that helps the tendon with stiffness and strength and that sort of thing too. So again, all about balance, right? Of just trying to, I wouldn't necessarily go in and throw in more because you're already getting more action like that with running. But I wouldn't stop either if you've been tolerating it just fine.
But I think that even if you did, like, if you, I mean, Caitlin, you've been active for a really, really long time, and so you haven't gone through this real valley of not doing anything at all. So you've stayed active. I think if you added double unders one more time a week, you're probably fine. Is it necessary? Probably not. I think you've done enough to minimize your risk with what you're doing. But your tendon probably could add a little bit more. And if you wanted to, like, hey, let me just add a little bit more double unders, you go for it, and then you just pay attention to how your body's feeling. But I definitely don't think it needs to be something you add too much to, because I think you're already doing a great job.
I would wait. I mean, I wouldn't do, as I was increasing.
Screw that, no, I'm just kidding. All right, so that's a good question, or to kind of lead us into our next issue here of, let's talk about different stages of Achilles tendon pain. And we're using the word Achilles tendon pain specifically. It is classically in the past, excuse me, I've been drinking beer and I keep burping, sorry. Classically in the past, it's been called Achilles tendonitis. Tendon being tendon and itis being inflammation. So an inflammatory condition of the tendon. So the Achilles is inflamed. And all tendons used to be called tendonitis. If you still live in that world, that's not accurate anymore. If everything you say is, oh, I have shoulder tendonitis, I have hip tendonitis, I have knee patellar tendonitis, if everything is in an itis, guess what, people? Our body is way more complicated and sophisticated than just having inflammation everywhere. Pain that we have does not have everything to do with inflammation. And too many times, when people have tendon pain, it's always treated as an itis, as an inflammatory issue, meaning let's put anti-inflammatories, NSAIDs, ibuprofen leaf, let's do an injection, let's calm it down by putting a boot on it so it doesn't get inflamed. And that is not accurate when it comes to understanding the complexity of Achilles tendon issues. So the better word, honestly, it's called Achilles tendinopathy. It's more of a bigger umbrella term. With that said, there are different stages of Achilles tendon stress and tendinopathy, one of those being tendonitis. So Sarah, what are those stages that start off with the tendonitis, and what's more of the appropriate term we're going to use, versus how does that digress or degress into later stages?
So there was an article and it kind of changed the outlook on that. It's by Jill Cook, and she really talked about tendinopathy being more of a continuum, right? Versus just a early or late, right? Like it's a status of continuum. So the early side of that being what they call a reactive tendinopathy. So there's either a change in stress, something that has irritated the tendon. What happens in that stage is it actually damages.
It's called reactive
tendinopathy, right? Your body is reacting initially to whatever stimulus was given.
So
right?
maybe some inflammation.
Right. So it's there. What happens is that it damages basically kind of the space between the cells, right? So not the tendon cells themselves, but the matrix that's kind of around it. And what happens when we do that is your body then tries to go in and repair it, and it throws these proteins towards it, right? But proteins love water, right? So these proteins then absorb water. We're made up of a lot of water content. So then what you end up with is increased water content within the tendon, which, again, i.e. swelling, right, I suppose.
Edema, swelling.
Right, so it is, and that water content within the tendon changes the strength of the tendon, and it changes how the tendon is responding to stress now. But that's ultimately what's happening within a reactive tendinopathy. You still have a normal tendon, right? The tendon hasn't degenerated. There's just a kind of protein response based on too much stress, which ends up with there being some fluid content within the tendon.
Let's talk through that. So you put stress to the Achilles tendon more than it's used to. Are we talking about micro tearing here of the tendon or itself, or because of that increased stress, your body says, hey, you're doing more than what I'm used to dealing with. Let me send in some backup. Let me send in more proteins to help heal this area, to help reinforce the area.
Right. My understanding is that at this point, like, you have a normal tendon. So there's
we're
really
not
tearing. It's just a response to stress, right? Like it's just like how it's a positive response in like how if I go lift weights, right? My body feels me pulling at this area, and it goes, all right, I got to go reinforce that, right? You're going to pull on it. I got to make that stronger, right? That's how we ultimately get stronger and fitter through fitness. So, but in this area, in this case, right, it happens to be that the kind of the molecule, if you will, that your body kind of sends to that area happens to be really, really. It loves water, right? And it absorbs water. And so when it goes into an area where we have water content, right, it kind of inflates a little bit, and that's where you're going to have that increased volume of water.
So that's where if you've been adding running to your schedule more so, or double unders, whatever it might be, or me and Sarah talked about, I've treated patients this way, where people haven't done much and they go on a trip. They go like, hey, we're going to go to Disney World and we're going to do 20,000 steps per day or more. Or they decide to go to the zoo and they hit a full, because they're family visits, and they do a full weekend of walking when they've been doing nothing. So you do this and you wake up and there's some pain in the Achilles tendon, and now you might see some swelling because of the thing you just said. Your body you haven't necessarily, it's not like torn, you haven't like chronically damaged, your tendon isn't going through any type of degenerative process at this point. You're having some more fluid, some more swelling in the area.
The tendon will feel full. A lot of times it will feel like it would be tender. If it is a tendon issue, the tendon will obviously be tender when you touch it. So,
yep.
If you think you've got Achilles tendinopathy and you're poking around back there and you can't find any tenderness, then it might not be Achilles tendinopathy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's an instance though that the tendon itself is healthy. Which this is the easiest stage to treat it in, because the tendon itself
is healthy. Shake the bone, it's healthy, do something about it.
So all you
I watched
really
Jerry Seinfeld last night.
do
something about it, people. What do you gotta do?
All you gotta do is just calm it back
Terrible.
down, and that a lot of times that's the easiest way to treat it.
Calm it back down.
Now that does not mean though, in calming it back down, that does not necessarily mean immobilizing it, right? So
let's jump into it. So we talked about, like, do we wear a boot or not? Is a boot, a cast, a boot, good for Achilles tendinopathy? But let's talk, is it good in this stage?
So here's the thing.
Early reactive stage.
Being put in a boot can provide some relief from symptoms, right?
Yes.
If you've
100%.
If you've got an area that hurts when it's loaded, you're being put in a boot, you take off that load, and all of a sudden your foot feels better.
Yes.
Here's the problem with that.
So it can be helpful. A boot can totally be helpful in that initial early reactive stage. But here's the problem. Go, Sarah.
When you completely shield the tendon from stress,
when you don't move it,
don't move it. You don't put any stress to it. Actually, when we completely immobilize it, in a healthy tendon, even you took a completely healthy tendon, but you just immobilized it, you create the same effects to that tendon as if you had overloaded it, right? You almost send it into a reactive tendinopathy, right? So you can totally immobilize a tendon and take all stress away from it, totally shield it from that, and it still potentially damages the tendon.
Yeah, your body's going, what's going on here? Why are you not using it?
It's meant to be pulled.
It's
meant to be stressed.
Motion's
it's meant
slow
to be moved.
Movement's medicine.
So if you take that totally away, then again it creates, it can cause issues in the tendon as well. So it's just, you're judicious in your use of that.
Judicious, big word there.
I do love a good big word.
You do, you get going. So what if you had a Achilles in the reactive phase in your Achilles, because you decided, you know what, dang it, it's a beautiful day, I'm going to go run. I've got a friend with us right now, you know who you are, I'm not going to say your name, who went and ran 50, I think it was 50 miles. Yeah, that's right. We were messaging, and I said 50K, and he goes, oh, no, sir, 50 miles. And he started having some Achilles issues. All right. If that was you, and you were like, you had that pain, you was a little swelling, and you're like, hey, I've got this boot next to me, and you decided to use that boot, how would you use that boot during a 24-hour period, maybe during a week?
Right.
Like, how would you use that boot judiciously?
Like, I might try it in the first day or two, right? If I were really trying to calm something down, I would come out of it, when I was sitting down or something like that.
Right.
I'd come out of it, I'd wiggle my foot, I would...
Wiggle with it.
Even potentially if I were in the boot, I would be working on pushing my foot up and down in the boot, right? Like little isometric contractions that were real gentle, that sort of thing. So I would still be working on giving some sort of, I would squeeze my toes, right? I would curl my toes, get blood flow to that area.
Tell your body, we're not completely shutting down.
Yeah, this is not absent, right? So, and I ultimately, if it were me, I would not stay in it long. Like I would try to get out of it as soon as
I think if it was me, I would give myself probably a 2 to 3 day limit because of the initial acute, maybe inflammatory swelling response. I want to let it calm down. So I would probably, if it was me, right, I'd probably be in the clinic with the boot on walking around, but I know that if I'm going to then sit for a period of a couple hours to work on notes or something, I'll be having that boot off, and I'll be sitting there moving my foot back and forth gently, side to side, those kinds of things. But if I get up and start walking, moving around, put that boot back on. So having a boot is fine to do. And maybe if yours is really bad, maybe you have to do that for a week. I totally get that. I think that's fine. But man, if you have an Achilles tendonitis, this reactive phase, I would not be putting my leg in a boot for 3 weeks or 4 weeks without taking it off. Like that's just, you're cruising for a bruising, as my mom would say. You're asking for a problem there.
And I think
don't do that.
Particularly in the lower leg, even other lower leg tendinopathies like posterior tib tendinopathy.
Yep, any type of tendon
perineal
issue.
tendinopathy, particularly if you're a runner, like you can't just stay in a boot for 6 weeks, let it calm down, and then start running again. Like you're gonna do the same thing.
Yeah.
The tendon just calm down, but then you go and load it again, and then you're gonna spark the whole process again, right again, right? So,
but not even worse though, because like you said, like
totally worse.
If you put your foot in a boot for 6 weeks, your body goes, all right, cool, they ain't using it. And then, like, in the same, like, you might as well have just kept running and continued to piss it off. It's the same thing as putting your foot in a...
Not advising that either, but...
Say what?
I'm not advising that either, but...
Yeah, don't do that. Yeah. But I'm saying, like, putting your foot in a boot or continuing to run on it, it's the same issue. You think you're resting it. No. Like, yes, it's fine to have your foot in a boot for a period of time to rest it, but then you got to be moving it, and you don't need that boot for very long.
Right.
If you got a fracture, let's use it. Let's immobilize something, all right? It's the risk reward here is you need to immobilize a bone. But when it comes to tendons, that is a reactive tendonitis, tendon issue here, not a torn tendon. I'm not talking about that here, guys. Then, yeah, don't put your foot in a boot and then decide to get back out of that 4 weeks, 6 weeks later and start running on it. Bad idea. Yes, your foot will feel better. You're having your foot inside that boot. You're like, oh, it took the load off of it, the stress off of it. The pain will calm down. Not always, though. Not all my patients.
Always, yeah. But
sometimes it will. Hey, I'm feeling much better. And then if you decide to start running on that thing, that tendon is not stronger. It is not healed. In fact, it could be worse. Don't do that. If you did do that, let's talk about how to progressively get through that with an appropriate stress and appropriate walk, jog progression. But suffice to say, having a boot is not the best idea for a long period of use.
Right.
Okay, what about anti-inflammatory? So, guys, we're jumping into here's the initial stage of Achilles tendon issues and what to do about it, and then we're going to get into kind of the middle and third stages and what to do about each one of those. So let's keep going here with what are you going to do with the initial stage? What about taking anti-inflammatories, NSAIDs? That's non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, I guess. What are you going to do about taking that medicine? What does the literature show? And we'll also, in this same conversation, steroid injections, which is a strong anti-inflammatory.
It's one of those things that it could go both ways, right? Like I had anybody that went to UT Health Science Center had Judy, she would always answer a question like, I don't know. I remember
that very clearly.
And I'm going to do the same thing because ultimately, anti-inflammatories can help with pain, and they can help with some of that initial response. And so, both an oral anti-inflammatory as well as an injection, it shows some potential positive response.
Yeah, so it can be helpful.
But let's talk about the flip side of that. The flip side of that being that the anti-inflammatory inhibits collagen reformation. What that means
is diminishes it. It doesn't allow it to do as much.
It slows collagen reformation. So what that means is that if all this stuff is made up of collagen, right? If that's the building block that all of this stuff is made up of, then now you're taking something that then slows the production of that building block, right? So it's like starting construction on a new house, right? But then only delivering half the wood you need, right, to build the joist. It's going to slow the process down, right? So this is where then, it can help with pain. There can be some positive sides about that, but there are downsides too. So again, I think it goes back to you should be judicious in your decision making of how much you use and how much you heavily rely on medication. I'm not anti-medication by any means, right?
We just don't want to rely on it.
But you don't necessarily want to rely on it either.
Yeah, I think again, practically speaking, if this was me and I woke up having done a 50-miler, and I looked down and my ankle was painful when I first got out of the bed. I was like, oh crap, what did I do to it? And I look at it and it's swollen. Then I think to myself, okay, If it's in a lot of pain, there's a lot of swelling, yes, I might totally use an anti-inflammatory to help calm the pain down. And I might put my foot in the boot if I had one, or I would tape it up to really restrict the motion, maybe. But I'm okay for doing that for just a couple of days. I am not about to use that anti-inflammatory, that NSAID, for the next 10 days, right? Of course, that's not something I would, as physical therapists, we don't prescribe medication. That's not our call. That's a physician who makes those calls. But that is not something that I'm going to put myself on, just say, oh, let me just take some ibuprofen because I'm used to doing that. And I'll just take ibuprofen, whatever milligrams per day for the next 10 days. And then you just get used to that. But the whole time, kind of can keep running, keep stressing it. Bad idea. I think it's fine to use it first to calm down that initial pain, the initial symptom. Maybe you immobilize it. Here's the deal. If I woke up, when I go do my 10K this weekend for Run the 901, if I wake up and realize, oh man, I really pushed myself and it was different and I felt some Achilles pain, I am definitely not, if it was just mild, I am not going to take an anti-inflammatory. Definitely not going to immobilize with a boot or tape or anything. I'm just going to say, okay, I stressed it too much. Let me back off maybe with some of my walking today. Or maybe let's just not go add more running today. But, you don't want to rely on anti-inflammatories just because you wake up and you feel some pain. It's okay if you maybe do it the first couple of days, but after that, man, you're asking for some chronic issues to start to develop. Because, the pain might be inhibited or calmed down. But as Sarah said, the collagen's you're not going to be able to you're not going to be able to rebuild that tendon.
Right. You don't have the building block that you need to make it back up. So, which then, the longer this goes on, then we'll go into your later phases of what's happening. So,
before we get there, what about the research on steroid injections? It's kind of the same thing, right? When it comes to NSAIDs, a steroid injection can help calm down the pain and it can show positive results for people in decreasing their pain, and it's a decent management tool. But a steroid also can weaken the tendon.
And this is something, again, it's that, an injection like that, that's not my wheelhouse, and so right. I'm not as well versed in all of the effects of that. But yes, the research does show that that steroid injection can be potentially positive for that. But I also know, I think it's different physicians might have different ideas over what they want to do with that as well. Right. And I think there are plenty out there that don't inject at the Achilles because of the risk of potential right. Damage to the tendon. And that
most of the physicians I know do a great job, I think, of not wanting to over-inject things. Because they know, if you've had it before, injections, a lot of physicians, it's standard, you don't want to do more than a couple per year even. It's not something, because they know that if you start injecting this once a month, you might feel okay when you have it, but then you're going to have a lot of negative effects afterwards, because that strong steroid, which removes oxygen from the area, it does not help the rebuilding of the tendon. Side note here, there was a great research study recently when they looked at people who did repetitive injections, corticosteroid injections in the knee, and people who had consistent, I can't remember right now how many it was, but if you had a certain amount, then you significantly increase your chances of developing more osteoarthritis, leading to having to have a total knee replacement. Because an injection can be helpful, but if you get too much of it, then you're going to start to break things down. And in this case, with the knee, you needed a knee replacement because you had too many injections, even though that treatment was the one thing you were trying to do to help your pain. So same thing with Achilles. You don't want to rely on a boot or a strong steroid or an anti-inflammatory too long.
It really boils down to, rest and proper load management. And that's just the thing that I think in treating what I think I have learned as a professional that treats this is that it's really not even about what I do quite as much as it is about helping somebody manage how much they're doing. So really somebody that you should have a very clear plan on what you're doing, how much you're doing, and that's just as much part of the rehab as just what you're doing inside the clinic.
So let's talk about that before we move to the next phase of, you have acute tendon pain, you wake up, you're having this pain, we're telling you it's fine if you're going to put a boot on, you probably don't need that. You might take some anti-inflammatories for pain, we get that. What do we need to be doing to help manage that? We're going to tell people, don't go run on it if every time you take a step, it hurts. and you're altering your mechanics. You need to rest it. Let it calm down, because if you let it calm down, these things can calm down really quickly. It's not going to take a month. It can take a couple of days to calm down, maybe a week. Maybe you have to alter your running schedule a little bit, but you're not going to miss a lot of time if you just rest it quickly, or you get immediately into rest. Other things you can be doing instead is you can still do some cross training. So you can still, I've got one guy doing a rower instead of running. I've got him doing, you could do the elliptical potentially. It's not going to be as much stress to it depending on how that feels. You could still be, because you're not doing plyometric and jumping and springing, you could still be going to an exercise class and doing squats, potentially some lunges if it's not too bad. You can do lots of different things like that. You can get a great workout in with some heavy weights.
Yeah, and that's actually interesting because that heavy load does not detrimentally stress the tendon, and if anything, heavy load helps the tendon. And so again, this is something that if when I've got athletes and patients that have struggled, particularly if you've struggled with tendon issues in multiple different spots and multiple different places, considering doing some heavy strength training as a part of your regular regimen, I think is a fantastic idea.
Let's hit that again, Sarah. So people who've had consistent hip tendonitis, Achilles tendonitis, plantar fasciitis,
patellar tendonitis,
right.
Achilles tendonitis, shoulder tendonitis.
If you're having that consistently, you need to get strong. You need to put some heavy load, meaning body weight squats, body weight lunges is probably not going to cut it for you. You need to be putting some external resistance, meaning you need some kettlebells in your hands, some weights, some barbells, some dumbbells, whatever. You need to increase the stress through your body by doing appropriate strength training, because appropriate strength training will help to strengthen the tendons. I think that's a myth out there, right? Should runners strength train? Yes, you should, right? Like, strength training is not going to bulk you up and make you too big and you're never going to be able to run. No, strength training appropriately. I'm not saying you have to try to go get buff and ripped, but appropriate strength training for you runners or for anybody can be so helpful to keep these things from happening. It's just so important to do that. And we try to consistently plead with our patients that you need to be adding some load, some strength training to your workout plan. All right, so let's move on to the next stage. What's the next stage after that reactive tendinopathy?
If that reactive tendinopathy is when you get that kind of influx of fluid within the tendon itself, the next stage is you've continued to add load, right? So the tendon has not been able to heal, not been able to repair. So then what happens is your body tries harder, okay? So it continues to throw those same proteins, those same building blocks at it that absorb that water content. It also starts to develop more capillaries, right? More little, basically areas where it's delivering blood to the area, as well as more nerves, right? So hence then now this starts to become more sensitized, more painful, right? So that maybe even now at this stage, right, you're having pain with less stimulus, right? It doesn't even take as much to make it hurt, right? You've got more nerves down there now, right? Because your body, your brain is trying to fix this area. So it sends down more blood, which means more oxygen, more nerves, which means more proprioception, more response. And that ultimately, though, that causes change within the tendon. So now you're starting to see that the tendon is actually starting to physically change. If you took a biopsy of that tendon and looked at it under a microscope, it would look very different.
Right. And that's when you're going to start to see some thicker tendons, where the tendon, because we've seen plenty of patients with chronic issues, and you look at the side with no symptoms, and you look at the side where they have their Achilles pain, and it is a lot thicker.
Right. You think about so if here's the regular tendon, then here would be the tendon that's in this stage. So it's bigger but not stronger, right? So if you think about like a braided, again, I love my analogies,
Go for it.
but like a braided rope, right? Like a stainless steel braided rope, right? When those braids are tight and it's all really taut, like that thing is really, really strong. But if I unspun it a bit,
Yeah.
so I've got the same number of fibers, but now it's untwisted, it's unbraided, right? The tendon, the space is wider,
Yeah.
but
The circumference is bigger.
The circumference is bigger, but it's weaker. I don't necessarily have more of those fibers making up the tendon. And I've actually just spaced it out so that it really, it's not as strong and it's not as stiff. So ultimately, when I land on that tendon, I don't get that same tug, that same stop that I do from a nice taut tendon.
That's a phrase that's used in the literature that I think can be a little bit confusing. Maybe you've heard someone talk about you want stiff tendons, meaning you want tendons that can quickly absorb the shock and not go through this bloom stretch phase. Sarah, you have another really good analogy.
I like that one. A big thing that you got to think, that a unique capacity of a tendon, and this is really what makes a tendon so unique in how, in its structure and its form, is it's based on energy storage and release. Okay, so that means it's like physics, right? It's like a spring.
So like kinetic and potential energy.
Yes,
So
kinetic.
you kids in high school, you youngins who are learning about kinetic and potential energy. See, it applies to everyday life.
It does. So it is a
Everyday
spring.
life.
There's energy stored within the structure. So I think about a spring and taking like a thick trampoline spring, right? One that is thick. You can't pull it very far, right?
It's
a stiff tendon, right? Or spring. And then think about like an old slinky, man. You've had this slinky since like 1980, right? If I pull those same two springs out to the same dimension, right, out into the same space, and I let them go, which one's going to travel further, right? The spring that's taut has more power, has more energy, has more response.
It's able to store energy really well and boom, releases
right,
it.
versus that really slack slinky, which I can pull out and drop, and it doesn't really go anywhere.
Right. So, great example of the importance of building strong tendons, because you want a nice reactive, or probably bad, but you want something that can really spring back fast. Building strength, resistance training is good for that.
And so this is, so the capacity of the tendon is now diminished.
So now in this second phase, again, give me the name for it.
It is tendon disrepair.
Tendon disrepair. Your tendon is now going through a disrepair process. It is losing its stiffness. It's losing its ability to absorb energy and react quickly. And so now when you're running, that Achilles tendon is having a harder time absorbing all that force. And the more you do it, if you don't stop and say, hey, I'm a tough person, I can deal with this pain, the more you do that, the more this tendon goes into a disrepair.
And unfortunately, the brain is getting used to pain in that spot, right?
Yes.
So
you have more nerves, they're sensitizing it, you've got more blood flow, and it goes through a complicated process where your body can kind of get used to that at that point. And you're still going to have painful times, but you think, oh, it's not too bad. It's not constant pain. I can deal with this. So what's the phase after that?
So then you go into degenerative tendinopathy. And
degenerative tendinopathy.
Degenerative tendinopathy, and this is where you don't want to be, because realistically there doesn't look like there's much capacity for true structural return or healing.
Now, let's jump to the end of the story here just a little bit. You can have degenerative tendinopathy where parts of the tendon is definitely in a degenerative state, and it's not going to completely repair itself. It's not going to, it is what it is. But you doing the right treatment, you can create a lot of strength and health around the area where you can get back and be running without problems.
Right.
So before we get into this kind of bleak view, because we do want to kind of scare some people here with this, that when you look at the tendon, do know that there's still ways out of this, but it's just a lot harder because what's going on with that degenerative
So at this point, the matrix, the space in between the cells is damaged and can't heal, and now you're actually getting tendon cell death as well. So actually, parts of the tendon are dying, right?
So if you looked
that's the bleak view there.
Yeah, if you looked at it under a microscope, you would see there are some dark spots. Like you're not having good fluid. There's nothing going into that area. It's cellularly, if you will.
Cellular death, yeah.
Cellular death. It's not good.
So, but like he said, this is the key there, is that all of this stuff, and this is really what Jill Cook kind of discovered, is that it's all a continuum, right? So you can have little islands, if you will, of areas that are really degenerated, but you still have a vast majority of the tendon that is well and healthy, right? So just because you've made it into that stage does not mean that there's not some capacity for healing, that there's not an ability to live without pain and that sort of thing.
Right.
It's really just more so saying, if you've gotten to that point, right, that realistically, if we took ultrasound imaging or MRIs, right, of your tendon pre-treatment and post-treatment, it's probably not going to look any different.
Ultrasound MRIs of the spot where the tendon's under stress, not the entire tendon, right? The tendon might be, it's long, but if you look at one area, that's where you're going to see cellular death. You're not going to see cellular death in the whole tendon.
Well, right, but you could see it in multiple spots, right? Like it could be sprinkled in there, like little islands, right? But realistically, that's probably not necessarily going to change. But that at that time, you might have said, like, yeah, I've got no pain anymore, and I'm back to walking and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of things that go into pain, and there's a lot of things that go into rehabilitation. But it does, we would really mainly say that as a reinforcement of, this is something that you really need to address, because you really don't want to let it linger to the point where you get there, because then there is physical change that is really hard to come back from.
Yes. So at this stage, this is a stage where your tendon has gone through some degenerative process, you are having pain consistently, but this is the kind of thing, like, what would someone who comes in and see us, what is the description? Like, they're going to say something like their tendon's going to be thicker, like, oh yeah, it's been thicker for a long time, I've got this nodule on my tendon, I had a steroid injection and it felt good for a little while, then it came right back. But I'm still having pain. But like, what else? What are they saying to us?
Most commonly, like, this is especially in older adult, right? Like the elderly too, right? Like that have had that their tendon is weak and has been weak for decades, right, or something like that. Or yeah, like you're highly active, either young or kind of middle-aged adult that has just continued to run and go through it. I mean, you can have, I mean, it'll be tender to the touch. It hurts with impact.
And sometimes it's the kind of thing where it hurts when you first start running, but the more you run, it kind of loosens up. You're like, oh, yeah, I'm fine. Because it hurts like hell for the first mile, but once I kind of get into it, I feel fine. But then afterwards, you're limping to the car. Or maybe you walk to the car, no problem, but when you get out of the car, when you get home, you're limping because it really, really hurts. But people can be fooled or I think confused by that, like, oh, I'm fine once I run, I just gotta loosen up. I'm getting older, I just gotta deal with it. But they just kind of keep running through it. But the whole time, the tendon is going through this degenerative process that it's not just because, oh, I'm just getting old, or it is what it is, I just gotta loosen up. No, you really need to take care of that so you don't have to deal with that type of problem before all of a sudden you go take a quick step and then the tendon tears on you and you get a full tear. So you don't want that. So in this stage, maybe you've had pain back and forth in your tendon. You realize, all right, it's been 6 months, maybe I've been dealing with this for the year. I better go ahead and get this taken care of. And you go to some practitioner, and they say, yep, it's tender to the touch. It's got some swelling around, or it's thicker, I should say. The tendon's thicker. Let's put you in a boot. Let's put you in a boot for 6 weeks, and let's see how you do with it. Is that a good idea to do in this third stage? No. No, don't do that. Because in the initial stage, there's an appropriate use of some anti-inflammatories in a boot, because the problem is it's a brand new injury, and if you calm things down, let it calm down, and you build back into it. In this stage, the pain you're having is not something that this tendon just needs rest from. It's not inflammatory. If you do a biopsy, again, if you take a look at that tendon under a microscope, there will not be any inflammatory condition of that tendon. This tendon is in a degenerative state, not in an active inflammatory state. And so what does a tendon need to heal? Load. So
that's where, like, again, in an early stage of treating somebody, like if I am treating, like a teenager that came in that's never had this issue before, but then really increased this, and it's an acute and immediate thing, right? It's more about taking load away. It's more about taking volume down, right? Like trying to get things to calm down. And then once it's calmed back down, then we can slowly ramp up. when I've got somebody who comes up and they've had this, Achilles issue going on for 4 years, right?
Yeah, and they're kind of used to dealing with it.
Then I'm gonna go ahead and we'll typically start in a heavy load,
Yes.
right?
And when we say load, we don't mean, run more. Not that kind of
weights.
load. Not that kind of load. We're talking about strengthening the area around it.
Right.
Putting some weights to it.
You can, in that instance, with somebody it's a little bit more chronic, you can do a little bit more kind of heavier strengthening and that sort of thing, a little bit faster per se, because it's something that they've been dealing with for a long time, and because it's not necessarily inflammatory, a lot of times it's going to respond well to that, not necessarily be flared up. But if it's something that's acute, if you go too hard, too fast, then it could flare it up a little bit more.
Yeah, and that's a balance that we have to strike with our patients of when they've had it for a long time, how soon can we load it? We start loading it really quickly by adding some exercises, but you can't do too much at first. You have to find that appropriate amount. Because when you first start loading it, another key aspect of this third stage of treatment is you're going to have some pain with it because of some things that Sarah already said. When the tendon is going through a degenerative process, you're going to get more nerve fibers that supply that tendon, and so you're going to have some pain. You've had it long enough. So we don't let pain be our guide in that no pain. If you do anything and it has pain, stop. No. With this type of tendon issue, you want to strengthen it, load it. You just have to keep the pain. Our standard rule of thumb is kind of a 3
or less.
3 or 4 out of 10 or less. Maybe you can go a little higher as long as maybe it's a 5 out of 10, but it comes back down real quickly. That's okay. But typically when we're doing exercises with our people, we want them to hit a 3 out of 10. And in fact, there's some decent research when the protocols are done for Achilles tendon rehab that if you're not causing any pain during the exercise, you might not be stressing it enough. So in other words, it's okay to strengthen and stress that foot, that Achilles, with some stress that causes a little bit of pain, but the pain better be where it's at, and then it should kind of calm back down. If you do an exercise and it keeps going higher, then that's a bad idea. In this case, with a lot of our runners, we'll still have runners run, but maybe we need to decrease the mileage that they're going. We might need to decrease the speed, the pace at which they're going.
How often?
How often?
Long?
Providing more rest in between days. So a lot of times, you don't want to underload it with this chronic situation. We don't put in a boot and say, stop doing everything, stop running. No, a lot of times you can maintain it. You just have to back off the stress a little bit while you try to build strength to the tendon, while you're trying to build stiffness to that tendon by strengthening exercises. So we're talking about what's an example of a strengthening exercise?
I love to start with isometric, so where you're working on pushing up onto the calf or onto the toes, right, so that you're raising the heels up off the floor, and even just holding in that position.
So that's the isometric. You pause with the contracted.
Not moving, right? That isometrics are really good for tendon health because they're engaging in the muscle and they're causing the muscle to hold, but they're actually not stressing or straining the muscle or the tendon itself, right? So it can actually be really useful in treating that. Same thing with eccentrics. Eccentrics is basically the negative phase of a contraction, right? So it's the lowering phase.
So you push yourself up onto your tiptoes, and the eccentric part is when you slowly lower down.
And then building back, you have to train somebody to build back into plyometric force, which plyometric would be quick jump, right? So I love pogo hops where basically you're bouncing like you're on a pogo stick. You've got to be careful with that, right? Like that's something that could easily flare you up. You don't start off with that. And how you dose that and how you get into that it can be a tricky, there could be some muddy water there.
Because a lot of times we feel like the patient's ready to start with some plyometrics and pogo hops, and we get them into it, but then they start having 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10 pain that's not going around, and it's achy for the next day or two. That tells us, not quite ready for that yet. We need to back it off a little bit. Let's get back into where we were, the steps before that.
Right, you can relapse, if you will. But even if that happens, right, it doesn't mean that it's game over, right? It just means, okay, we got to calm it back down. Yep. And sometimes that can be trickier to do, but it doesn't mean that it didn't work. It's just timing, right? So, I think that gets to the biggest thing, if I could tell anybody, any one piece of advice, is be patient with this. Like does not necessarily solve itself overnight, right? So it's a process, it's a continuum. The body has to adapt, and that takes time. Like, you don't just...
It took a long time to get to this problem. It's going to take time to adapt and get out of it.
You do not just start something, and I mean, for most of us, you do not just start something and instantly become awesome at it, right? Like, a lot of times, like, it's a slow process getting there, and it's a diligent process getting there. It's kind of like the same thing, right? It has to be trained, and it has to have time to adapt to get where you want it to go. Yeah,
and part of that time, that adaptive process, is figuring out the right amount of stress, loading, strengthening exercises to help that, which BT Dub, so sorry that I'm just not mentioning this, but we have a playlist, a YouTube playlist for you guys if you're watching this video that you can click on. It'll be if you go on our Instagram, regular page, it'll be in the link. You click on that link and you'll get access to it. For Facebook, it'll be on our Facebook page, 901 Physical Therapy. So we have a link of just a few of these exercises to demonstrate things that we do with our patients that can be super helpful. And if you have questions about that, please reach out to us. This is things that we can definitely give you some guidance on. But yeah, so for this stage, you're having to play around with how much can we stress it. So a lot of times it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. You know, it's the kind of thing where we say, all right, you're feeling good, you're doing great, we've been running, we've been doing some jogging at a certain pace, certain mileage. Just go ahead and try to bump that up. You go bump it up, and then boom, you get set back. It's painful, it hurts to walk on for the next few days. Again, that's not like, oh my gosh, I'm back to square one. No, we just overstressed it. The body responded, we learned from that, and we just we have to build back a little bit more appropriately to it. But it's patience is required. This is the same thing with any type of tendon injury. Whether it's an elbow tendon issue, a shoulder, it's a patellar tendon knee issue, whatever it might be. In this, when you've had it for a long time, it's all about finding the appropriate ways to stress it and strengthen it, and modifying your activity to kind of keep moving forward. As long as that pain is mild, it's okay to keep going, because as the more you do it, you realize that the more you strengthen, the more you do some exercises and maintain some activity. Yeah, you're going to have some mild pain, but then you look back on it and realize, oh, I've actually been able to steadily progress things, and I'm not having that same flare. I'm not having those same sharp shooters anymore. So it's really important how you kind of step by step make good decisions about how you're going to add load to it.
Yep.
Cool?
Cool.
All right, that was a lot longer than I expected. That's what happens when Sarah and I start talking about tendon health. Some other things that we do, which we're not going to get into right now, we'll talk about another time. Jessica's like, I was going to talk about this. Certain things that can be helpful is dry needling. We do a lot of dry needling to the muscles around the tendon. Dr. Jessica with 901 PT, she has some more experience with needling the tendon itself, which can be helpful to stimulate a healing response. So if that's something you're interested in, please reach out to us. We will get you on the phone with Dr. Jessica, and she can explain that. But in ways that research has been promising. Y'all, this is still, when it comes to research, this is definitely still something that we're still learning more and more about. So this is not something that's completely figured out. We do not have all the answers in this. Please let me say that. But there are some promising studies with how you load the tendon appropriately through exercise. Also how you can use things like dry needling to the tendon itself to help improve a healing response during these different phases. So those are things that if you have questions about, we would love to be a resource for you guys, because we know how ticked off you can be with having a chronic Achilles tendon issue. So hopefully this helps. If you have questions, please reach out to us. Our website is 901pt.com. You can reach out to us through our social media channels as well. Again, access that YouTube playlist that we have. There's also a little special deal for you if you click on that. If you've made it this far, we do give a discount, a 50% discount in fact. If you have watched this video and you have Achilles issues and you want to come see us about it, we would love to be here to treat you for this. This is stuff that we treat with our patients all the time. We'd love to jump in and dive into the weeds with this with our patients. So if you have questions, please hit us up. We'd love to be a resource for you guys. Thank you so much. All right, have a great weekend, guys.